is in Vedanta. When you realize this truth, these Vedas and Quran and Bible will be of no meaning to you. When you have realized the truth, why do you need all this? That is why in the verse 46, this idea is expressed in a very great verse. So many great commentators have written commentary on this verse in such noble language. It says, Yavanartha udapane sarvatas sampratodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanataha. When a man who realizes Brahman, realizes the infinite truth of the Atman, what need has he for Vedas and other sacred books? Just like a man who is living near a lake which is brimming with water, why should he dig a well for water? He just stretches the hand, he gets water there. Everywhere there is water. This kind of sarvata sampradodaka sthana, as it is Shloka said, just like a flood of illumination, just like a flood of water, there is a flood of illumination. Why should he go in for rituals? Why should he go in for this and that? That is a great idea, that scriptures and other things are only means. We need them at the early stages. Just like rituals, rules, regulations, we need in the early stages. But when you become spiritually strong, we don't need them at all. So the Vedas are so sacred to the Hindus, but the very Vedas tell us, go beyond the Vedas. Vedo avedo bhavati, says the Veda itself. When you realize the truth, the Veda becomes aveda, no non-Veda. You are yourself the Veda, because you have seen the truth. Thou shalt know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, says Jesus. That idea, you get it here. Tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanataha. To the man of self-realization, God-realization, these Vedas become as much use as a well is to one who is sitting by a lake full of water. That's the language used here. To the Brahmana, to the holy man who has known the self or the Atman, the Vedas are of so much use as a reservoir is when there is a flood of water everywhere. That is a great idea in our literature. Realize the truth. Use all this, but realize the truth. The emphasis is Atmava are drashtavyah. Yajnavalkya telling his wife Maitreyi in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, my dear, this Atman, your true self, must be realized, must be experienced by hearing, by thinking, and by deep meditation. You will realize this truth, and when you realize this truth, you realize everything in this world, for the Atman is the all. He is in everything, he is in every being. As pure consciousness, it is universal, one and non-dual. These are great utterances in Vedanta. Now we deal with verse 47, which is the key verse in this philosophy of action given by Sri Krishna. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturbhuhu ma te sangos tvakarmani. 4 propositions are here tied together in a profound meaning. To work, you have the right, is the first proposition. The second is, not the fruits thereof. Third says, let not fruits be the motivation for your action. And fourthly, neither should you be addicted to inaction. If I don't get the fruits, why should I act? That attitude should not be. To work you have the right, not the fruits thereof. Let not fruits be the motivation for your action. What is the motivation for our action? That will be dealt with in the succeeding verses. But here, this verse is largely misunderstood. Without aiming at fruits, how can I work? Perfectly true. But a constant emphasis on the ego, that all the fruits must pertain to the ego, that is being removed here. We have to knock off that center of gravity of the ego, because the ego in man, organically centered, is not the true self of him. This is a profound truth taught in Vedanta, and I am glad to find that is emphasized in biology in this 20th century. In a famous book written by H.G. Wells, G.P. Wells and Julian Huxley, over 50 years ago with the title The Science of Life, which is a digest of modern biological knowledge. There is a section towards the end dealing with the philosophical implications of modern biology. There comes a discussion of the status of the ego in evolution. It's a remarkable statement. We see in the vast vista of cosmic evolution no datum called the ego. In the vast vista of organic evolution, you don't find anything like the ego. It is only at the human stage the ego appears, that too after a baby is over 2 or 2.5 years old. What a profound datum it is. Once the ego comes, man becomes powerful. He dominates all nature. If that is so, what is the meaning of this ego? What is its status in evolution? Is the discussion that's carried on in that book, Science of Life. This is the main theme in ancient Vedanta as well. I quote from that Science of Life. This ego in man may be one of nature's devices, a convenient, provisional delusion of considerable strategic value in evolution. It has a strategic value in evolution. It is a provisional delusion, not a final datum that is to come. That's a beautiful idea. The authors began that section with a very imaginative sentence. They say, alone and in the silence of the night, and on a score of thoughtful occasions, we have demanded, can this self, this ego, which is so central to my universe, which is greedily possessive of the world, ever cease to be? Certainly, without this ego, this world has no meaning. And yet, every night when we go to sleep, this ego dies, and we do not know by what stages it creeps to an awareness of its own existence. That's a beautiful observation. The ego dies when you go to sleep. A waking man is well fed, he goes to sleep, and he dreams he is hungry. If this ego was there, how could he dream so? The poor man dreams that he is wealthy. What kind of strange experience! All these various experiences taught the Hindus of ancient India to consider the ego exactly what science considers it today, as a provisional delusion of considerable strategic value in evolution. The ego has come. It has given man a sense of power, a sense of strength, a sense of domination. We see therefore a human child dominating huge animals, sitting at the back of buffaloes or horses, guiding them. Physically, that animal is so big, this child is so small, but he dominates that animal. Grey-Walter, the famous neurologist of Bristol, in his book The Living Brain, asked this question: what made man dominate all nature? We do find man dominating nature. Then he gives the answer: the capacity for imagination which man has made possible his domination over nature. The image-making capacity, that when a sensory input comes into the system, he is able to image that sensory input and vary his reactions according to the situation, which no animal can do. And because of this, a new focus of awareness comes within the human individual, namely the self, namely the ego. Along with it comes many new capacities like reason, judgment, will, and eventually speech communication. All these made man dominate nature. What a wonderful datum is this ego. And so, Grey-Walter says, if you doubt this truth which I am presenting, then find out the alternative. Suppose the tiger or the lion developed this capacity of imagination and this focus of the self within, what would be the result? And he answers with a chuckle in his eyes, you and I won't be here to discuss this subject. Any species that develop this focus of awareness within, self-awareness, would dominate nature. In this case, man has achieved this development. Is it the final? No. It is only an initial datum. It is only of a strategic value in evolution, as a provisional delusion, says biology. Vedanta says the same thing. This ego must be transcended. We have to go beyond it into something more infinite that is there. This ego is conditioned by the organic system